You already mentioned that the United States is an ally, and I think I would go even beyond that. Apart from the 4 years under the Trump administration, where relations between the United States and the European Union obviously deteriorated to the extent that even the long-term survival of the transatlantic alliance and partnership was in question, and where values seemed to diverge, the fact still is that even during that time, the European Union probably felt much closer, obviously, to the United States than to China. So the whole issue of should the European Union align itself with China in view of the fact that the United States has become, during that time, a less reliable partner, I think is probably the wrong question. On the other hand, now with the Biden administration, a return to multilateralism, a return to strengthening alliances and doing things together with partners should not create the illusion that everything is as it was before. It's a return to the status quo ante, and therefore the partnership, the alliance with the United States will be the one determining factor, and the European Union is not in need to make difficult choices. So both ideas, I think, go in the wrong direction. What the European Union can do is, I think, continue and build on what it started to do under the Trump administration when it changed its policy towards China. And that, I think, is a bit overlooked, that this started in 2016 and then went on with the strategic paper, which was adopted by the European Council in 2019, when for the first time the European Union labeled China not only as a partner, as a competitor, but also as a strategic rival. And that, I think, was a bit of a turning point where the European Union also started to strengthen its defenses and become clearer on how to define and defend its interests. And that, I think, creates a pretty strong basis for building a new partnership with the United States. It's not sort of going back to where we were before, with the United States enlisting Europe in a coalition against China. I think the European Union has defined its interests, which will not always coincide with those of the United States. There will be difficult choices. Clearly, the European Union is no longer naive with regard to China, but it will wish to make its interest felt in making sure that we're not slipping into a new Cold War, into decoupling, into a situation which would be dangerous and not beneficial for any of them. And that means also building relations with other partners, as is happening with Japan, with other partners in the region. There is talk of an alliance of democracies. I think the main point is that the European Union is not talking about containment, but it's talking about diversification and strengthening its relations beyond China. And that, I think, is key, and that will also be the key component of the new Indo-Pacific strategy, which is under consideration. I think there's a major, when we talk about how the European Union should position itself vis-à-vis its partners, there's a major difference between China and Russia. Both are based to a certain extent on the difference of values and the difference of systems, obviously. And in the longer term and more strategic sense, China is probably the greater challenge, both economically, but even strategically, politically. But more immediately, the difference, of course, is that Russia is not only a great power, but Russia is our immediate neighborhood. And therefore, Russia is, in a more immediate sense, much more clearly important for the stability in the neighborhood, which is important for the stability of the European Union itself. And obviously, we have to find ways to come out of this situation where the European Union tried to build a relationship with its Eastern partners, which in its view was not directed against Russia, but was based basically on giving those countries a free choice and bring them also to a certain extent in the regulatory ambit of the European Union. Now, seen from Russia, this was obviously seen as a threat in an area which was seen as being vital to protecting Russia's interests. And with the invasion and then annexation of the Crimean Peninsula in 2014, the attacks on the eastern part and the situation which is still ongoing, I think the situation not only deteriorated, but it also showed that the European Union and Russia are no longer, if they ever have done that, seeing eye to eye on what the constructive relationship and a new sort of order in Europe could be. And that, of course, got worse with the Navalny situation recently, and when High Representative Borrell visited Moscow, which was almost a show of humiliation in the press conference with Foreign Minister Lavrov. It also became clear that there is little interest on the Russian side to strive for a new relationship with the European Union. And that's a fact. And I think, therefore, to have the illusion that there is an easy way out in the short time would be exactly that, an illusion. And you mentioned the difference in views of different member states, how they see Russia from those in the immediate neighborhood, the Baltic states, Poland, which pursue obviously a harder line than those further away. But I think the most recent developments also created a stronger sense of unity, meaning that we need to create a framework which is not giving up our values, which does not lead us to believe that we can change Russia, certainly not in the short term. But at the same time, it's also clear that channels of communication have to be kept open, and we need to build more realistically on what then High Representative Mogherini defined as her points of how to deal with Russia in 2016. This is not going to be easy, but I think this is cautious work where we should also not neglect that our neighbors in the Eastern Partnership and also in the southern part of our neighborhood still expect the European Union to become more engaged. And this is something which will be the challenge. That's a very difficult question. I think we also have to realize that when the Eastern Partnership was created, the region in a certain sense looked more stable than it does now. Obviously, we had the Lukashenko regime in Belarus, with which the European Union had little interchange and where sanctions were in place until 2016. But that was a special case. Ukraine was more hopeful, I think, in creating sort of a closer relationship with the European Union. Moldova was always shifting a bit its position, but there is a very strong current which is pro-Europe. And in the Caucasus area, I think we again have the legacy, of course, of the post-Soviet situation, the recent conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the situation in Georgia. So I think the Eastern Partnership has to build on the realization that this is an area which, to a certain extent, is torn between its relations with Russia, partially in a difficult neighboring position, especially Armenia and Azerbaijan, and the aspiration not to be locked only in the Russian sphere of interest, but also being able to pursue an opening and create a constructive relations with the European Union. This will require very careful balancing, and I have the feeling that more recently, there hasn't been much enthusiasm to talk about the Eastern Partnership, and I think we also have been preoccupied with other issues. But I think we need to return to that in a very careful way, not to abandon the region, I think, which is so important for Europe's stability. And it will be linked, certainly, in the medium to longer term to how relations with Russia will evolve. But the two issues are still separate, and we need to find ways to expand the voice of the European Union in a constructive way, which will not sort of create more uncertainty, but also build on reassurance and a realistic way forward, which is not easy to design. Well, I think that's a very important point. I think there are some issues where it's easier to bring the public and civil society along, at least sort of in a broad sense. You know, there are very few people who contest that climate change will be one of the key issues. There are also very few people who don't believe that creating stronger health systems and being prepared for future pandemics would not agree. The economy obviously is the basis of our prosperity and well-being. When it comes to issues like the European position internationally, it becomes more difficult, but we cannot sort of create a more geopolitical Europe, a stronger Europe in the world, when the case cannot be made for everybody to understand why we would need that. Why it, in the current world, which unfortunately has marked the return to power politics, we need to change an approach which basically was premised on the expectation that the world would become more multilateral, more based on rules, more peaceful, when the opposite is happening. So I think we need to explain that protecting European interests by developing stronger instruments and a stronger voice internationally will also have an immediate impact on the security and well-being of individual citizens. And that's why I believe that if we manage in the Conference on the Future of Europe to also sort of bring this message to the people, that this is not sort of an arcane issue discussed among foreign ministers, way removed from the concerns of ordinary citizens, then I think we will not be able to build that stronger Europe. So that's why I think this is a unique chance to also focus the discussion on what we expect Europe to do in the world to protect the interests of citizens, rather than just being involved in power politics.